what I do is I distinguish when you talk about something like risk of Lyme disease, we could say that in this scenario, there's high risk of low risk of shark attack. In this scenario, there's high risk of shark attack. But look what's happening. There's sharks on both sides. So on both sides, the threat is there. But in this case, this person's doing something that's a little bit better in terms of reducing their risk. So you can be that person and reduce your risk of tick-borne diseases by listening to the stories I'm going to tell you and not be this person that goes swimming with the sharks. So let's get back to the ticks, or let's get to the ticks. Is this a risky tick? Does anyone know ticks? You know? What do you think?
Yeah, what species?
It's a deer tick, yes. So this is a deer tick, which makes it a bigger concern than dog ticks because it can carry things like Lyme disease. But again, we don't necessarily know whether this one's infected or not, because this time of year, about 50% of the deer ticks you encounter, 50% of them have Lyme disease. So that means fully half of them don't. So that's the first takeaway. Are all ticks risky? No, we just established that, right? So not all ticks are risky because half of them don't have anything. And all of them of the dog tick species, they don't pose any risk for Lyme disease at all. So not all ticks are risky. Some are more risky than others. And so understanding where the risks are is very important. So going back to just the drawing from the analogy of the shark. So when we think of risk, these are symptoms of Lyme disease. This is erythema migrans, that's the telltale bullseye rash that probably better than 80% of people get when they get a case of Lyme disease. There's another less common feature, which is Bell's palsy, which is partial facial paralysis, and then swelling of the knees. But those are the things we most think of and that we're most fearful of is the symptoms, the endpoints, which are measured as risk over number of people sick versus the total number of people. But like the shark attack, we know that the hazards lie inside the tick or inside the water, if you use the shark example. And what's mitigating all of this is something that we would call exposure, which is how these two pieces come together. It's a tick, and it's you, and it's the exposure that's going to make the risk. And what I'm here to tell you is that there are things that you can do that don't require eradicating ticks, which frankly, I don't think we're going to figure that out for a while. But there are things that you can do to reduce your exposure and tolerate the fact that their ticks are there and not end up like this. So here's a couple of things that you should understand about tick exposure. First of all, how many human bites are there in the state of Massachusetts? Anybody know? Is it 1, 3, or 12 species of human biting ticks? There's not 12. There's more than one, but there's 3. There's 3 species. We already mentioned 2 of them. One is the deer tick that most commonly is found this time of year. The other is the dog tick. And then the third one is the Lone Star tick. Now, the good news for us in Hampshire County right now is that there are really only 2 of the 3 are of concern to us. So if you go to Cape Cod or you go to Martha's Vineyard, you're going to encounter that third species, the Lone Star tick. For the most part, we just have 2. The deer tick and the the deer tick and the or black-legged tick and the dog tick. And only one of them transmits Lyme disease, but we'll see there's some other threats associated with other species. So which of those tick species is associated with Lyme disease? This is the Lone Star tick. This is the dog tick, and this is the deer tick. Here. Just this one. And notice that it has different life stages. This is called the larval stage. So this is sort of the infant tick. This is the nymph, so the kind of the teenage tick. And then this is the adult male and adult female. These are the corresponding life stages for deer, dog ticks and Lone Star ticks. So yeah, 3 species of ticks, but 3 times 4 or 12 different types or 12 different appearances of the ticks, depending on whether they're larval ticks, nymphal ticks, or adult ticks. other thing that I can tell you about this, you notice anything different about, do you notice anything different about these four? What do you see different about them? Size, definitely. What else? Something that you could count. Yeah, these have 3 legs. These have 8, 8, 8, same here, 3, 8, 8, but yeah, sorry, 3 pairs, 6, 8, 8, 6, 8, 8. So you can always tell a larval tick by its 6 legs. And the good news about larval ticks is they're not infected. So if you get a larval tick and you see a 6-legged tick, it's not one that poses risk to you. You don't generally see them on people, but occasionally in the months of August and September, we will see them. There's those 3 species of tick. This is to tell you, there's a lot going on the slide, I realize, but deer ticks transmit Lyme disease. None of these others are associated with Lyme disease. So if your big concern is Lyme disease, you have to worry almost exclusively about these ticks. What I want to tell you though is that there's other things that are transmitted by those ticks as well, including babesia and anaplasma, which are, this is a malaria-like illness, this is a bacterial illness. There's another bacterium that's more recently cropped up. All of these are relatively infrequent, maybe 5 to 10% for these, 5 to 10% of the ticks, less than 1% for these, and much less than 1% for these, but they are things that exist out there. Excuse me, I thought it sneezed coming. And then there's rare diseases that are transmitted. So I told you that dog ticks are not a concern for Lyme, but they do have some rare diseases like Rocky Mountain spotted fever and tularemia, so it's not completely safe. And then the tick that we don't worry about here in the Western Mass yet is the Lone Star tick, and it has a different ensemble of pathogens that are associated with it. So the first message that you can learn is that you learn a whole lot about how serious a tick bite is just by understanding what its species is, because you can rule out certain things that aren't going to be a problem for that tick. Let me show you something, if this will work, the behaviors of ticks. So one of the myths about ticks is sometimes we hear people say they fly or they jump from trees or they don't do any of those things. Here's what ticks do. They crawl out to the end of a branch. So this tick is going to do, this tick is going to crawl out to the branch and then it's going to quest. So she puts her legs out and then she waits for someone to come by. And then she jumps on, she grabs, she makes purchase on the host, and then she crawls around. And this is what creeps us out, right? So this is why you find a tick. This is why you get home and you lay your head on the pillow, you're going to bed, and you feel the tick in the hair, in the back of your hair. They started at your feet and they made their way up. That's how ticks move. And then she's gonna attach. I'm gonna pause that for a sec. Has everyone had their dinner? So then what she does is she actually glues herself into place. So she puts her mouth parts in and she feeds in a very different way than mosquitoes feed. Mosquitoes feed very much the way a phlebotomist would take your blood. They cannulate the vein, they put the needle into the thickest part of your vein and then draw the blood out. Ticks do something very different, because that process of drawing from the vein can happen in the matter of 60 seconds or so, or 30 seconds. These guys attach themselves and then they'll stay on for 6 or 7 or 8 days and they'll feed and they'll continue to sort of cultivate this blood meal here. All of that sounds really gross and very scary and not going to build a lot of enthusiasm. But there is good news in terms of the story that we're trying to tell. It means that you have 8 days to find that tick and pull it off. And the sooner you pull it off, if you pull it off on day 1, you probably have done a lot to protect yourself. If you find out on day 2, you're doing better than day 3, and et cetera. So even, and this is sort of the punchline to come at the end, even if you can't find every tick that bites you, you should know that even if you can't find every tick or keep every tick off you, if you find every tick that bites you, you can do a lot to reduce the risk from that tick bite. It's not like tick gets on you and it's, the end of the road. Okay, so what I want to do just in the last little bit of time here is, but I want to do a little quiz for you to test your sort of knowledge of ticks and tick-borne diseases. And we'll see how we can sort of help you to resolve some of those myths that people have, or misconceptions, I should say. So you can do this, you can play along, it's a quiz. So here's my first question. So tick prevention is not possible once a tick has bitten you. Disease prevention is not possible once. Is that true, false, or you don't know?
False.
Absolutely false. Yes. You can do lots. You can do a lot to improve your possibility of reducing disease by pulling the tick off early. That's what we said. If you don't know, hopefully you know about that now. A tick getting on you is not, as I said before, it's not the end of the road. It's actually just the start of the story or the middle of the story. And you still have lots of opportunity to pull it off and improve that circumstance. And I'm going to tell you why in a second. This is just to remind you that I showed you a similar slide before. So there's the black-legged or the deer tick and the American dog tick and the Lone Star ticks. And this just sort of gives you an idea of the risks of these different pathogens. So look, well, first look at, this is Lyme disease, Burley Burgdorferi, 0% in dog ticks, 0% in Lone Star ticks, as we said before, so that's good. Things like Ehrlichia, which is a relatively rare pathogen, 0 to 2%. This is tularemia that I mentioned before, also a very low incidence than the other ones. So there are diseases that are involved. I always want to remind people that it's not just Lyme disease, but there are other pathogens and other diseases associated. All right, so let me ask you another question. Ticks that transmit disease are too small to be seen with the naked eye. Do you think that's true or false?
Oh. They're pretty tiny.
They can be tiny. And if you have really bad eyes like me, you may have a hard time finding them. However, they're not, often we hear people say, oh, they're just, I can't find them. Well, actually the ticks this time of year are quite large. So they're somewhat bigger than a sesame seed. So not gigantic, but they're pretty good size. And as they feed, I don't think I have a slide of this, but as they feed, I do have some slides in the future here. They get much larger because they fill up with blood and they get easier to see. So again, the longer the tick's been on you, the bigger it gets and the easier they are to find. So, okay. If you find a tick on your body, you should remove it. You think that's true?
Yeah.
Or should you wait and maybe wait till you have the right tool or the right circumstances, get it off immediately?
Yes.
Anyone want to disagree with her?
You're finding a
Right, splitting right down the middle. Oh, no, now there's more people saying that that's false.
I get it right out. That's good.
Right. So this answer is true, and I want to tell you why in a minute, but I have some related questions to that one that people often have misconceptions about. One is if you leave a tick's head stuck in your body, it can still give you Lyme disease. Do you think that's true or false?
False. Sure.
So this one is also false, and I'll tell you why in a moment also, but we'll go one more of these. As a tick feeds, or at least a tick needs to feed for at least a whole day to transmit Lyme bacteria. True or false? So this one is one of the most important things you can learn tonight. This is true. That ticks have to be on you for a length of time in order for what's inside them to come out of you. So that's why we say take the tick off as quickly as you can, because every bit of time that you've reduced that exposure, you've improved your chances of having a favorable outcome. The second one that I asked you, right, the question right before this was about the head. It's sort of a trick answer because ticks don't have heads. So the heads don't pop off in you. They have mouth parts. The mouth parts may break off as you're pulling them out, and they may be retained in your skin. But as soon as that happens, that tick is either dead or it's at least separated from the mouth parts. And what's inside the tick no longer can come out inside of you. So when you pull the tick off, your hunch was exactly right. Take it off as quickly as you can. Don't wait till you have forceps. Don't use a burnt match. Don't use dish soap or nail polish or heard all kinds of different things. None of those work. The best thing is a fine pair of tweezers, close to the tick bite, pull it off. If you don't have that, you're out on a hike and you don't have a medicine cabinet on hand, use your fingernails and pull them off, get them off. And don't worry about breaking off the heads that they don't have. And don't worry about the other sort of misconception is that the tick, you can squeeze it and then squeeze what's in the tick into you. That doesn't work either. So I have an image to show you that. This is tick anatomy, tick anatomy 101. This is, I don't know, you, me, down here. This is the skin, the surface of skin. This shows you what ticks do. This sort of yellow gooey stuff, they glue themselves to you. And then they create this feeding lesion down here with their mouth parts, which are chewing mouth parts. And then they suck blood, but they also spit saliva that helps them to feed. So what I'm here to tell you is that ticks don't have the ability to regurgitate. You can't squeeze something out of a tick into a wound, into the bite site. It's just not anatomically something they can do. And the reason that we know it takes 24 hours, or maybe closer to 48 hours, is that when this tick picks up this germ, let's say this is the bacterium, when it goes in to the tick, it's going to end up in the belly. And the only way it can come out of the tick is by getting into the salivary glands, which are shown here. And that takes not just 48 hours, it actually takes the whole molting cycle. It has to advance to the next stage. So it has to go from a nymphal stage to adult stage. It takes months and months. Then once it feeds on you and it reactivates, it takes 24 to 48 hours for it to move from this thing called the midgut into the salivary glands and then possibly off to the next host. All of that takes time. It's all biology, it's all biological processes. And it doesn't happen instantaneous because ticks aren't syringes, ticks aren't like mosquitoes. They're doing many biological changes to the bacteria that live inside them. So I told you before that we can tell the difference between tick sizes. But an unfed tick, an unfed female deer tick looks like that. After they fed for a day and a half, they look a little bit bigger. Day 2, day 3, day 4, and see what they look like after day 7. They get really large. So you have to kind of be in caution. You know, you should be able to see them before they get to this stage when they're most risky. It's slightly harder for nymphal ticks because they start off smaller. These are relative, but they still get bigger as they feed. And so you have a chance to see them. Okay, so if you get a positive test result for Lyme disease, it means you have Lyme disease. Is that true or false?
Depends on what kind of test.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. So if the test is what most tests are for, which they're testing for serology, testing for the presence of antibodies, what they're usually trying to test for is whether you had an exposure to that bacterium. And if your body has made antibodies, then you will test positive. Interestingly, it usually doesn't happen for a couple of weeks after the exposure. So if you get bit today and you get infected today, it's going to be a 2 or 3 week course before your body will even make antibodies, so you wouldn't test positive. And then you'll retain the antibodies for a length of time, and you would still test positive even if you don't have the bacteria. So that's important to know because some people get sort of hung up on the fact that they might have a positive Lyme test, even though they don't have the symptoms that are necessarily associated with the infection. I think this might be the last one, but this is another important one. So true or false, ticks are active all year long. I hear colleagues say something about this all the time now. It turns out that both of these are kind of true. So what is true is that you can go out, outside into your yard or into the woods, and you can find a tick almost any time of year, any day of the year. But if it's too cold, or there's too much snow on the ground, or generally if it's too wet or too dry, you probably won't see ticks. So ticks have activity cycles. These are data that we've collected over the years for looking at ticks. These are the months, January, February, March, April, May. And you can see there's 2 very distinct activity cycles for the black-legged ticks in particular, the deer ticks. So yeah, you can find ticks in January, but your risk is much higher this time of year. And notice the transition here from early on, it's just the dog, the deer ticks, and then later the dog ticks and the Lone Star ticks sort of kick in. And then again in the fall, there's another cycle that crops up where you have the adult deer ticks come back again, Xodius scapularis. So I show this because I want to remind people that there is this period of sort of quiescence that happens every year. And it's always kind of amazing to me, the number of people that I run into, like that I know around town or whatever, and they'll say, oh, it's not such a bad tick year this year. And what they're doing is they're remembering, or they're comparing the month of August of this year with some remembrance of a May or a June that year or previous years. So they're saying, oh, it's been a really good tick year. When in point of fact, all they're misremembering is that it's always a good tick season or a low tick season in the months of August and September. So if you're planning a trip to the Cape, August is your time. That's when the ticks are least active. But yeah, they're active throughout the year, but the risk of getting bitten by a tick is not the same. It's much higher in the spring period, and then again in the fall, starting around Halloween. I made that comment the other day, and someone said, "Oh yeah, great, you ruined Halloween for us."
So why only deer ticks that are like true leaves, but the other two species just?
We don't know. So the thought is that that this is the main peak, that these are the adult ticks, and that these are ticks that didn't feed and they overwinter and then emerge and take a second chance at a blood meal here. For a long time, we thought it might actually be two cohorts, like two distinct genetic cohorts, but we have not found any evidence of genetic differentiation of these two. But yeah, I guess the simplified answer is that those are ticks that didn't feed the year before, and they make it over to the end of the next spring. We know that in the laboratory, so we collect ticks and then we keep them in the laboratory. These ticks are generally not as healthy as these ticks. I know that probably doesn't break anybody's heart, but these ticks are generally a little less rigorous than the ones that we see in the fall. And that's because they are kind of at the end of their life cycle. So deer carry Lyme disease and transmit it to deer ticks. Is that true or false?
That could be about it from mice.
Ticks get it from mice. Yeah, so this one is false. And it's probably one of the more complicated things about Lyme disease, because it turns out that the ticks themselves, almost every black-legged or deer tick starts its family on the back of a white-tailed deer. It has to get on a white-tailed deer in order to complete its life cycle. That's where it meets its mates, that's where it lays its eggs, and then that's where it starts the next generation. But it turns out that, and it's kind of shown by this cloud in this slide, that the bacterium that causes Lyme disease, Borrelia will not grow in black and white-tailed deer. So white-tailed deer actually have something in their serum, which was demonstrated by someone in our lab, Patrick Pearson, that there's something in the deer's the blood of the white-tailed deer that actually kills the pathogen. So it's a myth that ticks are involved with, we call it Borrelia, the bacterium that causes Lyme disease. But it is true that they're absolutely vital for Lyme disease, because without deer, you don't have ticks. I know that would be confusing. So a fine example of this is, or an example of a demonstration of this is the island of Monhegan in Maine. They actually they extirpated the deer. They took all the deer off the island, small island, mile long, half mile wide. They took all the deer off and they have no ticks. They solved their tick problem. You can't do that anywhere else. This is a small island. It was, I think, 23 deer or something less than 40 deer. They had brought a sharpshooter in, and over the course of a week, they took all the deer away. There's really no other, you can't do that in Amherst, and we probably, most of us wouldn't even want to do that, so it's not a possible thing. So eradicating deer is impossible, or at least isn't probable either. So I will say that one of the things, I'm going to finish up here and just tell you that at the University of Massachusetts, we have, the folks at the back of the room are actually members of our center. We've been doing operational research to try to figure out how to reduce the incidence of ticks. And one of the things that we think is fundamentally important is the white-tailed deer, because it is the breeding host. So while it's not involved with Lyme disease, they are feeding a lot of ticks, and we think that's sort of the linchpin to backing this down. Not that we're suggesting that we should eradicate deer. We're just trying to think about ways that we can reduce the incidence of ticks on deer. One of them could be, so you probably know this, that the way rabies is kept out of certain areas is by giving oral vaccines that they're baits that are given to raccoons, and then it prevents the rabies from entering that zone. We're thinking that something like that could work, where we give an oral therapy, like an acaricide that kills ticks, or we could give maybe even a vaccine that prevents tick bites, not prevents the disease, but it prevents the tick bites. So here at Amherst, we actually have a one-of-a-kind facility where we're keeping deer. They live very nice lives, and we're just experimenting different ways that we might be able to give them different feeds that would reduce the incidence of ticks on them, and we're hoping that that might stem the tide. I didn't show any slides here demonstrating this, but you know it because that's why you're here. The rise of Lyme disease starting from the early 1980s to today is it's a slope like that, and nothing has done anything so far to reduce it, or to reverse that trend. And we're hoping that things like this can maybe start to begin to do that kind of change. So what can you do about ticks? The best things you could do are personal protections, things that you do to protect yourself, your kids, your pets. For yourself or your kids, you can just think about proper clothing. Generally, that means long pants and light colored pants and socks and shoes, not because ticks have a color preference, but because ticks are easier to see against the background. So if a tick gets on you, you have a better likelihood of pulling it off. And this little fashion statement of sticking your pant leg in your sock is, remember, most ticks start out on the bottom and then they work their way up. They start at the foot level. And as they crawl up, if they crawl up on the outside of your pant leg, there's a chance they can get brushed off, or you can pull them off. If this was where I'm wearing my socks, actually I have my red socks on tonight. If you put them inside, they crawl up the sock, and where do they end up? In the inside of your pant leg. And that's where they want to be. So just light colored clothing can help tuck the pant legs in. And of course, check for ticks. Check your body for ticks. Check. You're working in the garden, you're going for a hike, check your pant legs, check your friend's pant legs, check your hairline, check all around your body. When you get home, think about taking a shower, jump in the shower and check your body then. When you're in the bathroom, when you're using the bathroom, you're on the commode, that's a good time because you're sitting down and you're looking at parts of your body that you can see because you're sitting down and you have your clothes off or partially off. That's a good time to look for ticks too. In fact, a lot of the public health document, like Barnstable County, we work a lot with the folks in Cape Cod. They give shower cards that people can put in their shower to remind them what parts of their body ticks are likely to be found, which is, I always say, it's the parts of your body that form a Y. So where your body, your armpits, your groin, all that kinds of stuff, that's where the ticks end up being. So if you want to do something, I won't say more, but in addition to checking ticks and wearing clothes, you can think about doing something to treat your clothing. So permethrin is a product that's engineered. It's an acaricide, means it kills ticks, 2,000 times more deadly to ticks than it is to people. Has a pretty high safety profile. Not recommended for very, very small children, and also not safe for cats in the liquid form. But for the most part, is safe on your clothes. You spray it on your clothing, it dries, and then your clothing is impregnated, the fibers of your clothing is impregnated with that acaricide. The tick gets on and absorbs it through their feet, and they die. You can also buy clothing that already has it impregnated. L-Bean, REI, EMS, all the major outdoor clothing places have their own particular brands. If you're going to spray your own, it's probably good for 5 or 6 washes. The manufacturers that make them and sell them that way will tell you that you can get 40 washes out of it before you start to use that after the week. Yeah, so we recommend this as one of the most one of the best ways to keep ticks off you, basically. It kills ticks pretty effectively. We go out in the field and collect ticks, and we don't wear that because we want the ticks live for our experiments. And we found that when people do wear this, we end up with a lot of dead ticks because even just having it on your pant leg and then having it brush off on the flags that we use to catch the ticks can be detrimental. That's treating your clothing. You can also treat your skin. So you can use repellents. DEET is one of them. Picaridin is another one that's very effective. And these you spray on your skin like you would spray. It is precisely the same product as that you would use against mosquitoes. The best for ticks, the best percentage is around 30% DEET. You can get 100% DEET. Overkill, 10%, probably not as good as 30%. The downside of DEET, well, the way it works is it's a repellent. So it doesn't kill ticks, it repels ticks. So if I spray it on my arm, the tick will crawl to that spot and won't go any further. So if I spray my whole arm, they just don't want to be on me at all. The downside of it is you have to reapply it every couple of hours. And so you have to keep retreating. But our repellents are good too. Eric is working on in the back of the rooms. One of our NEWVEC scientists is working on different types of repellencies that can improve upon DEET. People use DEET before, probably most of us use DEET. Have you ever put DEET on your sneakers? So Picaridin doesn't have that effect. So if you don't know, DEET will melt plastics. So that keeps people out a little bit about what it does to your skin. Picaridin doesn't have that effect. Eric's looking at things that are more naturally occurring compounds that might have, not that for people that don't want to use, for example, synthetic chemistries of their skin. And then, of course, source reduction. There are things that you can do to kill questing ticks, like backyard barrier sprays. We're running a project we are the New England Center of Excellence. I have a slide showing this at the end, but we're New England wide. We're funded by a $10 million grant from the CDC. We're housed right here at the University of Massachusetts, but we have partners in each of the other 5 New England states. And we've been running a program called Project Itch. Itch stands for Is Tick Control Helping? And what we've been doing is going into backyards where they spray to kill ticks. And we compare the density of ticks in those backyards that have been sprayed with ticks that haven't been sprayed. We're on our 3rd year of doing that. Going to be taken up, well, we're doing our 3rd year starting next week. And I can tell you that by and large, we're finding that if you use these synthetic products like bifenthrin, which is synthetic acaricide, some people would refer to them as poisons, they do kill ticks and they do it quite effectively. Whether it's actually reducing exposure is another question, because the way these are used, they're literally as barriers. So if you can imagine, so there's a carpet down here, it'd be like spraying on the outside of the carpet to keep things from getting to the center of the carpet. That's the idea of perimeter spraying in yards. It's not killing all the ticks in your neighborhood or all of the ticks in your town. It's basically creating a protective barrier. It's effective for creating that barrier, which is short lasting and requires some kind of reapplication. It also involves spraying chemicals that people don't want in their yards, and they're not without consequences either. The chemicals will kill pollinators, but you're generally not spraying them, or the company that's spraying for you isn't spraying where the pollinators will end up. Not spraying them on flowers, you're spraying it on leaf litter where you're more likely to encounter ticks than you are. But if a butterfly or a bumblebee or something wanders onto that, they will get exposed and it will be detrimental. So that's the downside of killing ticks. We're looking at, I mentioned before, finding ways to kill ticks on hosts. So the things we can do on white-tailed deer. Other groups are looking at things that can be done to kill ticks on mice, including transgenic mice that they would release en masse. And yeah, I just don't know how that's going to work. And then you can reduce, modify host population. So you can do things to like reduce the density locally. I mentioned that Monhegan study. You can do deer exclusion fencing on your house if your property. If you have a big property, you put a fence around it. That can keep deer out, and that can have sort of that same Monhegan Island effect of reducing the incidence of ticks. But for the most part, source reduction is really a tough thing, because one deer can feed, one female tick can lay 2,000 to 3,000 eggs. That's 2,000 to 3,000 babies, and one deer can feed several thousand ticks. So several thousand ticks, each giving a couple thousand babies. One deer creates pretty high densities. And this is our center, this New England Center of Excellence at Vector-borne Diseases. Those 5 people on the back are students and staff that serve in that. There's a couple of people online too. And thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Yeah.
So understanding the smaller tick, the deer tick, 50% of them are infected in this area.
About 50% of the adults, which aren't the smallest, they're actually the biggest of that tick, yeah.
And then there's the dog tick that cannot give us Lyme disease.
That's right.
But what is it that it can give and what is the percentage?
It's tularemia, and it's less than 1%. It's a very, very small fraction of the ticks that have tularemia, or occasionally Rocky Mountain spotted fever.
So just this week, I've had both ticks on me and my indoor cat. And I think it's because she lies by the door where the kids come in. I found 2 bigger ticks on her back outside the front. 2 days in a row, I pulled them off and they were alive. Crushed them and flushed them, but will a pet, like, I mean, I got them right away off of her. So she's fine, I guess, unless she isn't.
Yeah, she's fine. So I'll tell you, we've tested somewhere in the neighborhood of 120,000 ticks that we've tested for these pathogens. Not all of them dog ticks, but say 20–30% of those are dog ticks, and we never see tularemia in New England, we never see tularemia or Rocky Mountain spotted fever in New England in those ticks.
So the bigger ticks, like Zachary, he had them in his head. They're playing outside all the time. You know, so took 2 off him.
Yeah, so these ticks, both dog ticks and black-legged ticks, they're universal in their choice of host. So they'll feed on almost anything, which isn't true of all ticks. There are ticks like rabbit tick that you very seldom see that feed on rabbits and almost exclusively on rabbits.
So I had the benefit of participating in the Lyme's vaccine trial that I at least got both doses before the site in Vermont fell apart. So a while back, I had heard that a Western blot was the sort of the official test that's not an antibody test. Is that still true? Is that still the best Lyme's test available?
So the recommended by the Infectious Disease Society of America is a 2-stage test. First an FA and then a Western blot. So demonstrate that there's something there and then follow up with the Western. And then I think the minimum number of bands in the Western is 3.
Yeah.
There's something like 6 or 7 possible bands. So a strong positive would be considered anything more than 3 bands.
And if I actually got the vaccine, I'm gonna be positive for the antibodies.
Not necessarily, because that's a hidden antigen. Yeah.
First, thank you. So do ticks smell, like the human, like, odor or something? So I think the question, for example, if I do hiking, there's like a well-known, like a trail many people go this way, and another is just like a fully, like, wild one. Do these, many people walking trail, they have more ticks maybe surrounding here because they smell, here, or versus the wild one, it's kind of like a random, like distributed or scattered.
It's a great question. So I want to go back to a tick picture to show you something. So tick anatomy. That'll work. Ticks do smell. They have the ability to smell. They have olfactory ability. But they don't, you would think maybe their nose would be like somewhere here on these mouth parts. But the nose is actually on the feet, on the legs, on the front legs. They smell with their front legs, an organ called the Haller's organ. And they have the ability to sense heat, but also sense different chemicals, which would be again this scent. The thing about deer ticks is they don't seem to be attracted to any kind of smell. So that's different, for example, than mosquitoes. So mosquitoes find you by your smells, the CO2 that our bodies get off, the odors that our bodies get off. That's how they find us in our tents or in our backyards. And certain ticks do the same thing. They'll move towards a gradient, over a gradient of CO2, move towards the target, move towards the smells. Black-legged ticks or deer ticks don't seem to have that ability. And it works kind of to our chagrin, and that Eric was trying to develop a way to repel ticks, to keep ticks from doing something. And we had a hard time getting them to do something that we wanted them to do, like move towards some odor, or move towards some source. So that we can then repel it, but they seem to not directed by olfaction.
Dr. Rich, I have a few questions off the chat. One is there a change seen due to climate change in their cycle of activity?
So there's more, my colleague at University of Rhode Island, Tom Mather, says there's more ticks in more places, that's for sure. So if you lived in Western Massachusetts for back in the 70s, you would know there were no deer ticks here. There were no deer ticks in the 80s. There were no deer ticks in the 90s, really. Deer ticks are recent arrivals here. They're now all across Western Massachusetts, Northern Vermont, into Quebec, all across New York State. They've expanded. But that expansion probably isn't driven as much by climate change as it is by the proliferation of deer. So if we look at the rise in the population of white-tailed deer in the last century, the 20th century, it just went up and up and up. And each of those is a breeding site for black-legged ticks, and that's why they're moving around. It's not to say that climate change might not play a role in it, but the bigger changes are the white-tailed deer and the fact that we now manage our landscapes in a way that's perfect for white-tailed deer and black-legged ticks. They love rock walls and edge habitats and arborvitaes and all the things we put around our properties.
Are mice still considered hosts to pass on Lyme in the later tick life stages?
The early tick stages, they do transmit to Lyme. They're the reservoir host. So a tick acquires infection when it feeds on a white-footed mouse.
Is it worth buying insect shield clothing?
Yeah, so that's one of the brand names of the permethrin treated clothing. Actually, it's proprietary, but presumably it's permethrin treated. Yeah, that's a good line.
Can you comment on ticks associated with rabbits?
Yeah, so maybe they're asking about, so we just had a discovery of that Project Itch that I was talking about. So we're sampling ticks in the backyard. In a couple of properties in Maine, down East Maine, we found some rabbit ticks, which are pretty uncommon because usually they're just on rabbits or they're in rabbit burrows. So we found rabbit ticks, we tested them. They didn't have any of the usual suspects but we found a new rickettsia that's related to Rocky Mountain spotted fever. We published that result in the Boston Globe and WBUR and the Gazette sort of picked up and ran that story. So it's a discovery of a new pathogen. Doesn't mean that like this is necessarily a threat to people because it's been a tick that doesn't feed on people. But now that we know it's there, we want to sort of understand it better to see if maybe ticks that do feed on people would feed on that rabbit and transmit it.
And the last one I have is, how long does the Lone Star need to be on you to feed? I'm wondering if they need to pass the disease.
Yeah, so they're probably meaning to like pass early or something like that. Generally, it's something greater than 24 hours for all of these pathogens. There is the rare exception because it's biology and there's an exception to everything. I had something about Poisson virus. There's evidence of Poisson virus, at least in mice, that it can transmit it in just a matter of minutes, like 15 minutes. So that has people alarmed because it's hard to, you don't have that same window of opportunity. But we've also done a study, it's a relatively small number of individuals, but we looked at 38 ticks that were positive. We received 38 ticks that were positive for that virus that fed on people. And then we did a follow-up of those people and none of them got sick. So it tells us that it's not transmitting with a high frequency, if at all, or not in a short period of time.
And then someone just asked, do you recommend that we seek medical care to start a course of antibiotics if we found a tick feeding on us?
I recommend that you take the advice of your physician.
I'm curious if you recommend, give our dog trio, something like that, like the dog and like is it beneficial for us as well? Like we're not taking it, but are we getting some benefit from that as well? Like, I mean, we found dead ticks on our dog. I just wonder if you have recommendation for that.
Yes, so you are killing ticks on your dog. That's a good thing because ticks will come in on your dog or your cat in your house and decide they don't want to be on your dog or your cat. and then get into your couch cushions and then get onto you. So that can happen if you're not killing the ticks on your dog or cat, which the products you're using are very effective to kill ticks. That's a good thing. And you're affecting the dog because dogs can get Lyme disease.
So back to this question, do we prefer like a higher body temperature, but you mentioned sometimes we also leave onto human, right? Or we normally prefer like dog, cat, I think we have maybe a little bit higher body temperature, I don't know.
Eric, do dogs have higher body temperature?
I said 1.5 to 1.3.
These are.
Yeah, but do we prefer warmer or not really, like?
It seems, my understanding is that they can sense warmer or colder, but they don't necessarily distinguish at that fine of a scale.
So it's possible they leave the dog and walk to human, that's possible.
It's possible. There's some speculation that deer ticks don't like to feed on cats, notwithstanding some of the good experience with blood. And so a deer tick that gets, a deer tick that gets on a cat will come into the house. Cat will decide, the tick will decide it doesn't want to be on the cat, and then it poses a greater risk to you because it's definitely going to fall off and still be hungry. Tick feeding, interestingly, if you interrupt the feeding, so if the tick is feeding on the dog, and you take it off, its chances of taking a second blood meal, if you released it, is very, very low, because they invest a lot of energy into that first feed, and if it gets interrupted, they usually don't have enough to sort of do that again.
I have a question on vaccine. Is there any work on that?
I mean, there were clinical trials that, I got both doses, this was about 2 years ago.
Yep, and then they shut it down,
And they shut down the Vermont site.
all of them,
Oh, they
the vineyard too,
Wow.
yeah.
And shut them down.
The message that we got was it was related to poor record keeping at the site. So I don't know, I mean, there seemed to be a little bit of flexible. I didn't observe the best clinical procedures going on at the site that I was at. I haven't heard, I won't ever know then if I actually got a real vaccine or not.
Right, because you could have been a placebo.
Could have been placebo, yeah.
So is there any,
It was a Pfizer trial, like the.
so, okay,
And
so.
there's always a few brewing, like there's a couple different formulations that people are talking about that none have gone to market yet. There were 2 on the market around 2000 and they were taken off the market. And some of those apocrypha is that people were getting sick from the vaccine. The companies claim that the sales weren't sufficient, that they couldn't sell enough, that they couldn't afford to continue to manufacture. But it is the same vaccine. That vaccine is the same vaccine that dogs get at, that dogs can use. People ask why
You're in your house, you find a tick on your body, what do you do with that tick?
what I recommend is that you get the tick identified. You can either, I've got some cards with me that have the different tick species, and you can try your hand at it. If you have like a loop or a hand lens, you can compare and see if you can identify it. Also, an organization that you can take a picture of your phone and send it to them, and within a few hours, they'll tell you what the species is. And you can, like on these, we've indicated the ones that are associated with Lyme disease, so that you can make that judgment call. You share that information with your doctor. Lone Star tick, which may or may not have had it. You can get the ticks tested too. There are different places that will determine if it's infected. That is something that I think can be very helpful for them.
And then you flush it down the toilet or?
If you want to get this, you've got to hang on to it.
Okay.
It's the record of what you were exposed to. But if you don't want to have it tested, yeah, stop it, do whatever. Do your best to.
So if you wanted to get it tested, you just put it in a Ziploc, those might still be alive, or
If it's alive or dead, the way it gets tested is they look for DNA. Tick.
you're in your lab, so,
We used to do it at UMass.
yeah, but you did.
Yeah, now we do it off campus. We do it at a separate site.
So if their dog carries the Lyme disease, does it has a higher chance or lower chance to carry the other 2 different bacterial diseases, or is it just random? It depends.
It seems like if you've got one, you have a higher
So they just,
Yeah. Whether that's co-infection in the same host or not, it's not clear what's going on there, whether one facilitates the other or is not. It's not understood.
guess that means it may be 2 or 3 different just in one, and
We've had ticks that have all 4, like Plossum, Babesia, and Anaplasma.
What kind of ticks are prevalent in the latest regions in New Hampshire?
Yeah, like music in the dog too.
So when I was diagnosed with anaplasmosis, the doctor said that was very rare, named some bizarre tick. They didn't know what they were talking, it was probably years.
It was most likely a deer tick, yeah.
And gorilla tricks in Rwanda, I don't need to worry about ticks.
No, I worry more about mosquitoes if you're in gorilla country.
If you treat your clothes with a refin, I thought I read, this was a while ago, but I thought I read that you shouldn't retreat it, same clothing. Is that-
Oh, you should periodically.
You can, the same clothing could be sprayed.
Yeah. I have a pair of hiking pants that I spray and I don't wash them now, it's honestly, it's wear them over and over again, so I don't wash them now, but, yeah. Because when you do wash them, you reduce them.
Right.
So is the, a lot of people are talking about this no mow or May, where like you don't mow your lawn for the month of May to help whatever. It feels like that's probably also really helping the ticks. And that if, like, what are things that, other than like perimeter treatment, that you can do to your property? Is it like regular lawn care, like what is, or is there anything in practical terms you can?
Yeah, regular lawn care seems to be pretty effective, so one of our colleagues in Connecticut is showing that keeping a well manicured lawn is helpful with that. Hardscapes, like if you've got patios.
Just painful.
Certain kinds of, there's actually a great book, if you go to NEWVEC.org, you can download a PDF, it's like a 78-page book. That has all these different practices that you can do to just manage landscapes. Just some of them very simple things like where you put your bird feeder. Don't put the bird feeder inside a tree line, which is where ticks like to be, because then the ticks are falling off on the birds and stuff from the birds, etc. So when you look at your bird feeders, how you manage your landscapes. But things like I'm doing the no mow way thing right now because I think it's a good thing for pollinators.
Yeah.
But these ticks don't really like grass very much. Dog ticks do. These are leaf litter, wood, not so much in the tall grass. They're not.
Bursting up in the fall is more critical.
Yeah.
If you take a tick out, like I had a tick, like deer tick last year in my farm and it was dead. When I got it. Was that any different than like if you get things out that are alive? Or maybe I killed it getting it out.
Maybe it killed it out, maybe it just died at the ground leaf another, but a dead tick is a good tick because it can't transmit when it was dead. Another thing that I would recommend when people take ticks off themselves, if you're inclined to, you can just put like a Sharpie mark where you took the tick off, because you can remember where that tick bite was, because if you get the rash, it will radiate from that site where you have the bite.
Good point.
Should we be recommending DPW and other outside workers to use insect shield on their clothing?
If they're going into tick habitat, if they're paving driveways now, or paving roads, probably not, but if they're gonna be working on trails or that kind of thing, it's probably a very effective thing. And I think it's important to remember about immediate treated clothing. Everyone gets the pants, a lot of people get the shirts, gotta remember the socks and the shoes, treat the socks and shoes, that's a fundamental piece of it too.
It's shown to be pretty safe to wear that stuff a lot. But as far as people know, it's pretty safe.
It's pretty safe. So if you go to, I'm always doing these elsewhere, I don't use it in Amherst, so I don't know what the logo is, but if you go to Amherst Farm Supply and you look at the different dopes that they have, bug dope and, things you put on horses, they almost all have permethrin. So permethrin has been used for a long time as an acaricide and insecticide. Pretty safe safety profile. Again, it's not particularly safe for other insects that were beneficial, but since
I'm
butterflies.
just worried about clothing wise.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly, not broadcast spraying.
So when we remove the tick, so based on your presentation, so if accidentally squeeze or put like high pressure on the like the belly part, it seems okay, but it's high pressure, it theoretically should like accelerate or put like high pressure, there's something like coming out, but actually not based on.
Usually what happens when you put too high pressure is the tick bursts and then there's blood. The tick has a pharyngeal block that prevents things from coming back the other way. So if you squeeze it too hard, it just bursts out the side. And that's not to say that that's not without consequence. You want to clean that up because that's your dirty side. And if you have a tick mouth part left in you, you'd also want to put some, something on your surface. Thank you very much.
Thank you.